welcome to the third episode of Welcome to Scary Town. This week we're going back and reviewing the classic Goosebumps book, Stay Out of the Basement. Our two main characters are Margaret and Casey, brother and sister. Casey is the brother. Their dad is a researcher. He used to work at this company called Polytech, and he recently got fired from his job because his research was kind of going in a too extreme of a direction. And you'll see as we'll talk more about what's going on with him. So he's still conducting experiments. He conducts them into the basement, and he's very working diligently with that. And then the mom has to leave to Arizona in Tucson to visit her sister who's very sick, and she's in the hospital. So she goes and leaves, and so it's just the dad and the kids in this house. Margaret has a friend, Diane, who kind of like shows up a little bit, but like is kind of not really all that important. She's just kind of like this side character. She's just there to just kind of be a confidant to Margaret when she's like talking about what's going on with her dad. And so we dive into what's wrong, what's going on. If I remember correctly, the original cover for this book had like this green hand coming out of this door, which is the basement, and it had like these leaves, and it was green. So it was just like, and I remember I think there was a second cover that they did, where it just shows like the dad in the basement, like all these beakers and stuff, and you already kind of see that he's a plant thing. So it unlike the first book in the series, this one is not doesn't try for any real scares. It's more of like kind of a thriller, just kind of a suspense of the kids getting into trouble. They go into the basement, I think, about like 3 times, and they get caught every single time, or just about every single time. And it's just them like trying to figure out what the audience already really knows, and it's pretty obvious what's going on. They're very curious about what's going on down in the basement because their dad is being very vague, and he's just like doesn't want to talk about it. And they're very curious because they're just kind of like Casey's playing video games, and Margaret's just like sitting on the couch with him watching, and they hear some real strange sounds coming from the basement that sound sort of human, like somebody's like moaning or crying or something. And so while their dad's away, like doing something outside, they go down to the basement, and it's very hot down there. So Casey, he has like I don't know where they're living, but he has like this sweater on, so he takes the sweater off. It's really hot, and they're just kind of looking around. They see all these weird looking plants, and they're just kind of making these humanoid sounds, like breathing, and it's kind of like sighing and that kind of stuff. And then Casey kind of like plays a trick where like he touches like this control panel and pretends like he's electrocuted, but he's not. Oh yeah, and then Margaret's friend Diane's down there with him, but it doesn't really matter all that much. She could be totally absent from it, and it just doesn't affect anything. Uh, and so Margaret hears, she goes upstairs to kind of like, because she hears the dad coming back, and she sees the dad talking to one of the neighbors outside. She's the lookout, just making sure. She's gonna tell Casey, who's like, "Hey, hurry up, Dad's coming back." And then he comes back up, and then all of a sudden he realizes he left the sweater downstairs, so he quickly runs down to go get it. And Margaret's like all freaking out because the dad's getting closer to the house, and he's like, hurry up, hurry up. And then she doesn't hear anything back from him, and she's getting really worried. And so Casey goes down there, grabs his sweater, but then this plant has its tentacles grab him like a vice, like a boa constrictor, just grabs him around his body. And but I believe Margaret's down to help him because she didn't hear anything from him, so she goes down to help him. And so she pulls it off, and then they quickly go back upstairs, and they kind of like try to pretend like nothing happened, but like the dad kind of already figured, did you guys go into the basement? It's very, very serious and in his tone. And so they're like, they try to lie to him, but then they're like, well, they caught red-handed, and it's just, yeah, we went to the basement because you never told us anything what you were doing, and we were curious, so can't really blame him for doing it. And so he kind of tells them, I don't want you going back down to the basement. It's very dangerous, so I don't want you guys to do it again. Margaret spies the dad coming out of the basement, and he has this paper bag filled with some kind of food, and he's just like grabbing handfuls out of the bag, and is like, she wants to know what it is, and then like he quickly like drinks some water, and then he goes back down to the basement. And so she sees that he left the bag in the trash, and she goes in and checks the trash and sees that it was plant food. And then Casey's not really taking it seriously when she tells it to him. He's just like, oh, our dad's like a plant man or something. And little do they know how true that it actually is. Like the next day, they're playing catch with their dad, and it's like a big moment for them because he's always absorbed in his work and never has time to play with them. So they're playing frisbee out in the yard, and so they throw it back to the dad, and it hits him in the head, and he has this baseball cap that Margaret remarks earlier, like, Dad, you don't like baseball, like, why are you wearing that? He's just like, I just do now, just deal with it. And so it hits him, and his cap falls off, and Margaret runs to check to see if he's okay, and then she sees these leaves that are coming out of his hair, and he's like, oh, she's like freaked out, like, oh, what's that going on? And so he sits them down on the porch and basically explains. He's like, well, what I'm actually doing with my experiments, I am fusing animal DNA with plant DNA and trying to create a new plant species. And I accidentally cut myself on my hand, and some of the blood got mixed with the chemicals, and this is a side effect of what happened. And so some of the plants are acting kind of weird because of that. His blood got kind of mixed in with stuff, which we'll go into later because it's becomes the big revelation of what's really going on. And so they're like, fine. It's like, don't worry, my hair will eventually go back to normal. It's just a side effect. And they're like, that reassures them. He's like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then she she's spying on her dad again. She still thinks something weird's going on, and she sees him in the bathroom. He has the bandage that was on his the palm of his hand that he explained earlier, and he pulls it off and he's like rushing water over it to clean the wound, and but instead of red blood, this green ooze comes out of it, and she's like all freaked out, and she makes a sound, and she kind of like bumps up against the door, and then the dad hears it, but it's like she quickly goes back to bed and pretends that she's sleeping, and so but luckily the dad never actually goes in to check on her, and so she tells Casey about this later, and he still thinks she's just making stuff up. Next scene is the dad makes this new dish, and it was just strange. The kids remark because like he never cooks. The mom's the only one that cooks, and so he makes this green like soup or casserole or something in these bowls, and it looks like really gross and smells really bad to the kids. And he's just like standing over them, is like eat, eat, eat. You know, it's like, why aren't you eating? What's wrong? And then he hears the doorbell ring, and he goes down to the door. It happens to be his old boss, Mr. Martinez, and he looks very upset because he doesn't want to see him right now, and he says like tells the kids, he's like, I'm gonna go talk to Mr. Martinez and lead him down the lab, and you guys better eat your food. I'm gonna come check on you guys. And so he leads them down to the basement, and the kids quickly like dump the food into the trash, and they're talking downstairs, and eventually they come back up, and then he takes off, and he was basically explaining what he's been working on. He's like, Mr. Martinez is like, yeah, that sounds cool, you know, we'll talk again. I don't want to keep updated with your what's going on with your experiments, because he still has an interest in what he's doing, I guess, seeing if what he's working on now might be a viable project to invest in, and maybe you can bring him back into the Polytech. And he goes back, and then the kids are just like, yeah, you know, we finished everything. He goes to check on something later that day, and so they used the time to go back to the basement and check to see what was going on. And then they find this pile of clothes, and it's like, it looks like what Mr. Martinez was wearing, and we're like, oh, this is kind of strange. And then they get caught again, and Dad's like, you know, you guys really shouldn't go back down there, and I'm gonna make sure you guys don't do it. And so he drills some holes into the door and puts a lock on it. It's like, make sure that they can't go back in there. And the wife of Mr. Martinez calls and leaves a message, and Margaret goes into the dad's room to kind of see if she can find anything, some evidence of something going wrong. And she hears the voicemail saying, like, you know, the wife is concerned that Mr. Martinez hasn't come home in like all day or whatever. He's been missing, and she's just worried. And she noticed there's covers on the bed, and it looks like there's something moving, and she kind of suspects that it's like a body or something. And she moves the covers, and there's this dirt everywhere on the bed and worms moving around. And she also finds the wallet of Mr. Martinez, and so she definitely knows something's going on. But since the lock is there, the kids can't go into it. But Casey like said he had a friend that taught him how to pick locks very well. So gets like a paper clip and then or a hairpin and unlocks it, and they go back down and they find a banging sound on the wall, and they go to investigate it, but it's like boarded up. It's like this door. Grab a crowbar and it takes both of them to pry the boards off, and they find Mr. Martinez gagged and tied up, and they also find what appears to be their dad, and Margaret wants to quickly rescue him and find out what he knows, but then Casey's just like, how do we know that's not our real dad? It could be a copy. And then as soon as he says that, that their dad is like right around the corner saying like, yeah, how can you trust that guy? I'm your real dad. And then there's this kind of like this square off, like you usually see in movies or TV shows when there's a copy of somebody and there's this showdown. It's just like, which one's the real one? And so Margaret grabs this hatchet and also a knife, and then the two of them are just kind of trying to prove which one is the real one. That is the one they just rescued refers to Margaret as Princess, which is like this nickname that he gave her that she doesn't like, but it proves that that one is the real one at first, but like she's still unsure. So she uses the knife, and she remembers the fake dad had like a green blood in his wound. So she's like, she stabs the one that called her Princess, believing that one's the real one, but he bleeds red blood, and it's just like, so that proved he was the right one. And then she takes a hatchet and just slices up the other one, and he just kind of like once he's get cut a few times, he just kind of like crumbles into like this like ash or whatever, and that's kind of it. And then the mom comes back pretty soon after that, and then the dad explains what had happened, that he had cut his once he cut himself, the blood mixed in with what his experiment was doing, and so the plants started to mutate and have like some of the plants would have like, one of them would have like a human head, another one would have like a foot hanging out, an arm, and all this strange stuff. And he said he was able to create a perfect copy of himself, but it was too perfect, and it beat him up and then tied him up and wanted to continue experiments in its own way. And so he was like locked up for a few days, and so everything's kind of hunky-dory. He's like, he's going to take the kids out for ice cream and hamburgers, and Margaret says like, hold on, like she's tying her shoes by the garden in the front, and one of the flowers looks like a sunflower or a daisy, kind of like it swivels its head, and then like as she's knelt over like tying her shoes, it like swivels around, and then it whispers in her ears like, it's like, Margaret, I'm your real dad. And it's like, he's like, please help me. And then it kind of like ends there with like her unsure if who's her real dad, you know. But it's just this typical like, you know, like a twist at the end, and it really doesn't make any sense. There's a few parts that I found really funny. There's one in particular where the dad, when the dad's explaining to them what's going on after the Frisbee incident, he talks about like, hey kids, you know what DNA is? And they're like, And so he's just like basically, I'll say it. Well, he says it's pretty complicated. Let me try to put it in simple terms. Let's say we took a person who had a very high IQ, real brain power, and then Casey interrupts him saying like me, and then Margaret's like, Casey, shut up, you know. And then the dad says, a real brain like Casey, and he's kind of like he agrees, and and then Margaret's just like rolls her eyes, and so I just thought that's kind of funny because Casey's always like joking around, and then Margaret like cuts him down. This I just like the chemistry between the two. As Casey's more of like this kind of like this free spirit, kind of joking around and stuff, and then Margaret's like has to be um, the very serious one to counteract him. And I just thought that was a fun little moment. And another part, after they hear the explanation that the leaves were just a side effect, Margaret's just like, there's all these questions I should have asked, like, why were the plants making all those strange noises? Why did that one plant grab Casey? And then more importantly, why was he eating plant food? So like she just like she wished she had mentioned this stuff. This is really important. And she's all she was worried about was the leaves in his head. And so I thought that was a funny moment. It was just like this is realization that a lot of people kind of have the same moment where like you wish you could go back to a conversation and add in stuff in hindsight. So I thought that was kind of cool. Another funny part is that the kids are like kind of scared, and Casey's saying it's so scary. I mean, he's our dad. We've known him all our lives. I mean, and then he's like, maybe you can explain it all. Maybe there's a good reason for everything. Like the leaves on his head. And Margaret's like, we asked him about that, and he said just that it was a side effect. It was kind of a weaker explanation. So, and then she admits that she told Diane about what was going on. And then Casey was like, oh, like you shouldn't have told her. And she's like, I had to tell somebody, somebody. And then Diane said we should call the police. And then Casey's like, what? Dad doesn't do anything wrong. What would the police do? And then Margaret's like, yeah, I know. I'm not sure how that would help. But she said, there's got to be some law against them being a mad scientist. And I just thought that was pretty funny. A law against being a mad scientist. It was like, I know it's kind of like a throwaway line, but it sounds pretty hilarious. This kind of caught me off guard. It's like, what? There should be a law against being a mad scientist, though. So I thought that was pretty funny. And another thing is how easily Casey was able to pick that lock. He said he had a friend that helped him. Taught him how to pick locks. That just raises even more questions, like, what kind of kid knows about picking locks, and for or what reason? Sounds like something a pretty shady character would know about. And then why would the happy-go-lucky Casey? Why would he want to know how to pick locks? It just seems so totally out of left field, and it seems totally like it was just the plot requires somebody to know a way to pick the lock. So it's like, okay, you just learned it from some kid while they're in the playground or whatever. It's like, yeah, whatever. So, and then my final thoughts. It's a pretty interesting read. You can kind of see the plot twist of the dad being a copy of a plant coming from it's pretty predictable in that way, but it's just kind of it's a fun ride. It's You know, nothing spectacular. Not nearly as interesting as Welcome to Dead House, and not nearly as funny. Uh, Nothing particularly horrible happens as far as that, other than um, hilariously, Margaret's like, the only way to tell which one is the real dad is to stab it in the arm. If it bleeds red blood, then that's the real dad. It's just like, what? This pretty extreme. There, it's a good solution, but it's like there could have been a less violent way of doing it. um, but yeah, I mean it's okay. It's but you start to see how this book kind of goes into a little bit more of a wacky kind of direction, especially the ending with the flower saying, "Oh, it's the real dad." Um, but I will comment and say that I have seen the Goosebumps TV episode. It makes that really dumb ending even more like stupid because when she steps down to tie her shoelaces, there's instead of just one flower turning to talk to her, um, there's multiple of them turning around, and each of them saying like, "Oh, I'm your real father," and this whole Spartacus moment, like and it's just really dumb. It's like this they multiplied the stupidity of that moment. Just it's so bad, but it's kind of funny to think about. But the chemistry between the Margaret and Casey, it really pushes it forward because the dad is just kind of like this one-dimensional character, as he's just just focused on work and just being real strict about like I don't want you going to the basement messing with my experiments and stuff, and there's no real depth to him, so it's just he's just kind of there, and the mom's just off, and Diane's like really just kind of there, and there's nothing going on with her. Um, and yeah, that's pretty much what I thought of it. And so next week we're going back to Horrorland as we go through the second book, Creep from the Deep, which I very excited to go over because I was pretty upset with. But you'll have to wait to see next week why I was upset. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Nightmare Nemo, all one word, and still working on improving the show. So if you like it, please hit the like button, and subscribe if you like the show, and follow me on Twitter. And thanks for watching.